Thank you, Admiral. And I thank both of you for emphasizing how this is put together. I know in the case you, Admiral, were nominated by a Democrat. You, Ambassador, were nominated by a Republican, and you wouldn't know it. And you, I think, articulated that very well. And I've not seen one like this before. And I think you had both the House and the Senate, and Democrats and Republicans on both sides. And I want to start off by just covering some of the things that highlighting the problems that were pointed out that the vast majority of the American people are not aware of. Those of us up here are. The Commission, and I'm quoting from this right now, the Commission assesses unequivocally that the NDS is not adequately resourced. And the further quote, America is very near the point of strategic insolvency. Further quote, America's military superiority, which underwrites the global influence and national security, that's our of the United States, has eroded to a dangerous degree. America's combat edge is diminishing or has disappeared in many key technologies that underpin the U.S. military superiority. The United States is at risk of being overwhelmed should its military be forced to fight in two or more fronts simultaneously. You know, some of us who have been around a long time can remember that used to be our standard. We had that there. We had to drop away from that, and that was regretful. So anyway, Ambassador Edelman, we are. Your report cites it very clearly that what some of our people have said, and they've said before this committee, in terms of what needs to be done. Well, we pointed out that in real dollars between 2010 and 2015, the amount of money dropped by $200 billion. It came down from $794 billion to $586 billion. And then, of course, that was 2015, the end of 2015. So we knew we had to do something. And so looking at the challenge that we had, we wanted to get up in 2018 to $700 billion, which we did. In 2019, $716 billion. And then in the President's original budget, it's up to $733 billion for the coming, for the fiscal year 20. Now, we've already established, and you've stated in the report and elsewhere, and we've also heard testimony before this committee, just as in two different times, that we need to be looking at it in terms of increasing to about 3 to 5% over inflation. Now, this is something we think we need. I agree that we need it. I think most of the people up here, and I know that you two agree with it because it's in your report. And yet, the 733 that they're talking about right now is one that is somewhat in danger. There's been several quotes of people who say we don't need the 733, but stop and think about it. This is not a matter of 3 or 5% over inflation. Going from 716 to 733 is 2.3% increase, which is below inflation. So I believe that we're being very generous in terms of interpreting this and saying that this 733 is going to have to be looked at as a floor and not a ceiling. I'd like to have each of you comment on that budget. That's going to be something that we have to deal with.
Well, Chairman Inhofe, I agree with the statement of the problem you just made. Let me talk for a second, if I could, about how we came to the illustrative finding that 3 to 5% was about the right number. And I will tell you that as smooth as the Commission's workings were, and as much unanimity as we had on all of the issues that are in the report, had I asked the Commission to tell us what each member thought the top line should be, I doubt we could have come to a unanimous agreement on that. But what we did agree on was that Chairman Dunford and Secretary Mattis, when they first testified before you and the SASC, not about the new NDS, but back in 2017 when they were still operating under the existing defense strategic guidance from the Obama administration, testified that they believed they needed 3 to 5% annual real growth in order to sustain that strategy. Our judgment as a commission was that the NDS has a higher level of ambition because of its desire to put us in a much better competitive space with Russia and China in particular, and that therefore it stood to reason that 3 to 5% as an illustrative number was the minimum that would be necessary, possibly more. I mean, I think you get a wide range of views among us on the commission as how much more, but that would be the minimum. And it's for that reason that we were very troubled when we talked to folks in the administration who said that they were planning, and the department, that they were planning on flat budgets after 19. It seemed to us that it would be very difficult to actually execute the strategy under those kinds of fiscal constraints. So I certainly agree that 733 ought to be, as my colleague just said, a floor, not a ceiling, as you all go forward in your deliberations.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think it's that's a longer answer, but a very articulate answer. And we know what we're going to have to be doing. And we have to have the right priorities in our own thinking. There's two other areas, and I think you'll be covering these in responses to other questions, but one having to do with China and Russia, what we consider to be our peer competitors. And I think that's significant. Sometimes people are surprised when they find out some of the things that China and Russia are doing that are actually ahead of us in many areas. Shipbuilding maintenance, hypersonics. Yeah, hypersonics, something that they hadn't even started yet, but they're already rapidly passing us up in one respect. Electronic warfare, nuclear triad, modernization. We haven't done any modernization. That's going to be one of the top things that we're going to be dealing with in this committee. Air defense, artillery. You know, we're both China and Russia have they've got us outranged and outgunned. We've heard the experts testify to that. So I'm anxious to get your response to some of those things in response to other people's questions. Then the last thing being now, disequilibrium is not a word that I use, but I'm sure it's real. It's out there, and I think that you say that there is a disequilibrium between the aging of America's nuclear arsenal and the vigorous modernization programs of our adversaries. And I would hope that during the course of your responses, you might articulate some of the examples of these, because this is something that's very distressing. I think we agree with you that the Secretaries of Defense of both the Republican and the Democrat administrations have identified nuclear deterrence as the department's #1 priority. Senator Reid.